What happens when a billionaire falls in love with a woman pushing carts on the streets of Nairobi? A man with everything to lose and a woman with nothing but her strength. Will he risk his fortune and family legacy for love? Or will society tear them apart? Love doesn't care about wealth, but does the world? David Mwangi, heir to the Mwangi Group, was used to a life of luxury and privilege. The Nairobi skyline bore the imprint of his family's empire, a name that meant wealth, power, and influence. Yet, as David sat in his sleek black Range Rover, now stalled on a busy street, he felt more stuck than ever. Frustrated, he stepped out of the car, waiting for a mechanic to arrive. He hated delays. His entire life was dictated by schedules, meetings, and expectations, particularly those of his father, Mwangi Sr., a man who planned David's future as meticulously as the next big real estate venture. As David stood brooding by the roadside, he saw a group of laborers pushing hand carts stacked high with construction materials. It wasn't unusual in Nairobi, but what caught his attention was the woman at the front. Her petite frame was deceptively strong as she maneuvered a cart laden with heavy metal beams. Her eyes were fierce, her movements purposeful, and she didn't flinch when the crowded street narrowed, her cart coming dangerously close to his stalled vehicle. "You need help moving this?" she asked, her voice carrying a note of calm authority. David, startled, responded, "No, I'm waiting for someone to fix it." The woman gave him a quick, appraising look. Without asking, she placed her hands on the back of the car, pushing it effortlessly to the side. David watched in awe, the expensive car shifting as though weightless under her touch. "There, now people can pass," she said, brushing her hands together. "What's your name?" David found himself asking, a rare curiosity piqued. "Nyambura," she replied shortly before continuing on her way. That night, in the quiet of his penthouse, David couldn't stop thinking about Nyambura. She was unlike anyone he had ever met. The women in his world were beautiful, educated, and refined, but they were also predictable, shaped by privilege. Nyambura was different, raw, real, strong in a way he found impossible to ignore. David returned to the construction site the next day under the guise of an inspection, but really he was looking for Nyambura. When he finally found her, pushing a cart as usual, he offered her a job at one of his warehouses. "I don't need your charity," Nyambura said, folding her arms across her chest. Her eyes were wary, as though she suspected a trap. David was taken aback by her resistance. "It's not charity. I need someone with your work ethic. You're strong, and I could use someone like you in a better paying position." Nyambura hesitated. She wasn't one to trust easily, especially not a wealthy man with smooth words. But the pay could help her send more money home to the village where her mother, Mama Njeri, and her younger brother, Kamau, depended on her. "Fine," she agreed finally, "but I'm doing this for me, not for you." Nyambura's job at the warehouse began as just another form of work. But as the days passed, she started noticing how often David came by to check on her. At first, it irritated her, the way he hovered watching her, sometimes bringing lunch or asking about her day. But she couldn't deny that David was different from the men she had known before. He didn't talk down to her or act entitled. He asked about her life, her family. Slowly, Nyambura opened up, telling him about her struggles to support Kamau and Mama Njeri back in the village, about how she had dropped out of school to work after her father died. David listened, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he was seeing the world through someone else's eyes. The gap between their lives was enormous, but somehow, in these conversations, it didn't seem to matter. Yet as their friendship grew, Nyambura found herself conflicted. She sensed David's feelings were deepening, and despite her own heart stirring, she pushed those thoughts away. What future could they have? A billionaire and a truck pusher? It was a ridiculous fantasy. One evening, as David dropped Nyambura off after a late shift, he lingered outside her small, modest home. The contrast between their worlds was more obvious than ever. Her simple one-room house standing in stark contrast to his high-rise penthouse. "I can't stop thinking about you, Nyambura," David said, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. His voice was soft, but filled with something undeniable. Nyambura stiffened. She had seen this coming, but it was a road she wasn't ready to walk. "David, this can't happen. We're from two different worlds. You don't understand what my life is like." David's eyes searched hers, a look of desperation crossing his face. "I don't care about that. I care about you." "Your family would never allow it," Nyambura said firmly, trying to ignore the growing ache in her chest. David hesitated, knowing she was right. His father, Mwangi Sr., had always planned for him to marry Grace Nduta, a woman from a wealthy, influential family, someone who fit the mold, but Grace wasn't Nyambura. She didn't make him feel alive in the same way. "I'll talk to my father. I'll make him understand," David insisted, though his voice wavered with uncertainty. Before Nyambura could respond, Kamau burst out of the house, panic in his eyes. "Nyambura, Mama's sick. We need to get her to a hospital." David didn't hesitate. He drove Nyambura and Kamau to the best hospital in Nairobi. Mama and Jerry's condition was worse than they had thought, and the local clinic in the village had been unable to help. David spared no expense in ensuring she got the care she needed. But as they sat in the hospital waiting room, Nyambura felt an uneasy weight on her chest. The fact that it had taken David's money to save her mother was a harsh reminder of the differences between them. She was grateful, but also resentful. What kind of life could she offer him when everything about his world was beyond her reach? That night, as Nyambura waited beside her mother's hospital bed, she overheard David on the phone with his father. "I don't care about the family business, Dad," David said, his voice low but filled with frustration. "I'm not going to marry Grace. I love Nyambura." Nyambura's heart raced. She hadn't realized how far David was willing to go, but hearing the word love scared her more than anything. She couldn't allow him to sacrifice everything for her. She knew what it was like to struggle, and she couldn't let him give up the life he had built. The next day, Nyambura returned to work, trying to focus on the task at hand, but her mind was consumed by David's confession. She couldn't let herself be swept up in a dream, especially when the reality was so impossible. That afternoon, Grace Nduta appeared at the warehouse, her eyes cold and calculating. She had heard the rumors, and now she wanted answers. "You think you can steal him away?" Grace spat, her voice dripping with venom. "David and I have known each other our whole lives. Do you really think he's going to throw that away for someone like you?" Nyambura stood her ground. "I'm not trying to take anything. I didn't ask for this." Grace's eyes narrowed. "You're a nobody. You'll never belong in his world." Nyambura said nothing, but inside her doubts grew louder. That evening, David returned to find his father waiting for him at their family home. Mwangi Sr.'s face was a mask of anger and disbelief. "You're seeing that girl, aren't you?" his father said, his voice cold. "Nyambura." David didn't deny it. "I am. I love her." Mwangi Sr. slammed his hand on the desk. "Love? You think that matters? She's nothing, David. She's poor. She'll drag you down and you'll lose everything." "I don't care about the money or the business," David shot back. "She's worth more to me than all of that." Mwangi Sr.'s eyes darkened. "Then you're a fool. If you choose her, you're out. You'll be cut off from the family, from the business. Don't expect a cent from me." David's heart pounded in his chest. He had known this moment was coming, but it was harder than he had imagined. Then so be it. David left his father's home, feeling a strange mix of fear and relief. He had made his choice, but what would that mean for his future? When he reached Nyambura's home, she was waiting for him, her expression conflicted. She had overheard his argument with his father and knew what he had sacrificed. "I can't let you do this," Nyambura said, tears in her eyes. "I'm not worth it, David. I'll ruin your life." David took her hands, his voice steady. "You're worth everything. I don't need the money, the business, or my father's approval. I just need you." For the first time, Nyambura let herself believe it. She had spent her whole life pushing people away, but now she realized that love was about choosing each other, even when it wasn't easy. David and Nyambura moved back to her village, where they built a modest but happy life together. At first, the villagers were skeptical, a billionaire living among them. But as time passed, they saw that David wasn't just passing through. He was there for Nyambura, and they belonged to each other. Mwangi Sr., meanwhile, tried to harden his heart, but he couldn't forget the memory of David's mother. In an old letter she had written before her death, she had reminded Mwangi Sr. that love was the only real wealth in life. Slowly the old man softened, visiting the village, where he saw his son happier than he had ever been. Grace, bitter and rejected, eventually moved on, but the sting of betrayal lingered in her heart for years. As for David and Nyambura, they found peace in the simple life, far from the wealth and power that once defined them. Together, they had found something far more valuable, each other. The end. Thanks for watching.